Greetings. Great. Well, we've just come through about the last 2 weeks of everybody in the world offering their opinion about the report card for the Obama administration for their first 100 days. And what I wanted to do tonight is I wanted to come together to gather together to discuss these report cards that have been issued and the grades that are being given to the Obama administration here in the first 100 days in the context of the predictions that are being made by various people and different organizations about what it is that we can realistically expect to be going to happen in the next 8 years, during which we would hope that Obama will be with the president still. As you know, the very famous predictions that are being made with regard to the Mayan calendar ending on December 21st of 2012, and everybody is predicting some major game-changing set of events to either bring to an end the era that we've all lived through in some type of a potential catastrophe, or perhaps some great awakening, some major spiritual awakening. The people in the UFO community are all talking about potential contact being made with an extraterrestrial civilization, kind of altering in a radical way the worldview of everyone. What I want to do tonight is I want to first of all, I'd like to begin this discussion of evaluating the various grades and evaluations of the Obama administration so that we can keep them clearly in mind, and then try to determine what we think objectively is really going on. I mean, virtually everybody here, I would assume, preferred to have Barack Obama elected president over John McCain. If there's anyone here who preferred to have McCain elected, there's probably medications or something that are available in the rear, but the bottom line is, so I assume that we're in a friendly audience here of all making these assumptions. But what I'd like to do is to begin. I would like to first of all, I would like to number one, I would like to start the discussion with sort of a classic American koan. The Buddhists have this way of making these kind of puzzling statements that seem to contain some type of a potential conundrum or contradiction that you work out as part of the studies of a new Buddhist apprentice. Then I would like to follow it up with a Rodney Dangerfield little joke from Las Vegas to kind of break the ice in the evening, and then move to a Sufi story. And in the interference pattern that is set up among the tone that is established by these three different offerings, in the penumbra of that interference pattern, I'd like to then start to discuss this issue of the Obama administration and what we think about it. So I'd like to start with this. The classic American koan that I'd like us to think about is this one, and that is, the question goes, what is the difference? You may have heard this, but what is the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? And the optimist is the person who believes that we live in the best of all possible worlds. And the pessimist is the person who believes that they may be right. Now, with regard to the Rodney Dangerfield story, it's this. I'm walking down the street and I see a friend of mine, and I come up to him and I say to him, hey, how's your wife? And he says, as compared to what? It's one of those old paradigm jokes, but it's important. I always think when someone's asking you to give an evaluation of something or to see how somebody is, you have to kind of think in terms of, well, as compared to what? are we talking about here? And the third point I'd give is the old Sufi. There's an old Sufi story. I'd like to just read the beginning of this to you. It says, it comes from the Book of Strangers, a Sufi book, and it begins with the end. And it says, after a long silence, Si Hamoud placed his hand on my arm and he spoke to me this story. There is a story told about the end of the world, how it will be. Vast numbers of the planet's population were sunk in ignorance and violence, in frenzy. In one of the great megacities, throbbing with directionlessness, yet explosive activity, 2 withered ancient old women, forgotten, dying beggars, crouched in a corner watching the endless, terrible spectacle. One of the women turned to the other and she said, "This is awful. Look at all of us. I understand nothing. Why this vast creation, this planet, these millions of people who have ended in misery? What can the possible meaning of this be? Was there ever a chance that we could have stopped this from happening?" After a long silence, the other woman placed her hand on her companion's arm and she said, "I remember a long time ago when I was still a young girl, a strange man came to our city begging. He came to our home in rags, and my mother turned him away. And I remember it was something in his eyes. If we had only listened to him then." So what I want to do is I want to address, if I can, these issues, the following several issues during the talk tonight. It's what exactly do we make of these various predictions of some terrible economic calamity beyond even what we've already seen happening, that is going to happen, that somehow there's going to be huge economic collapse. Others believe that there could be some huge total catastrophes. They believe there could be a polar shift, that somehow the South Pole is going to move up to the tip of South America, or the North Pole is going to all of a sudden move to the location where the Hawaiian Islands are, and that there's going to be huge, massive disruptions, the so-called Great Shaking, the earth recoiling at the mistreatment of her. That others believe that we may be coming into a point where the great collective of suns at the center of our galaxy are going to be shining cosmic rays on us in a direct pathway that has never been known for 26,000 years. And that in the heightened cosmic rays, many people will die from what they perceive as radiation poisoning. Whereas others who have a much higher frequency are going to be brought up into the light, and that because of their conscious evolution will enter into a new era. There are many of these types of predictions that are being made, and there are those, of course, who think that nothing special is going to happen at all, that we'll just continue to kind of muddle along, that nothing of any great cosmic significance is going to happen, even though it is during our lifetimes, our special generation of this great baby boom generation who are completely convinced that we've been born for some special reason, in some special era, that something special has to happen. Or is this all there is? Type of thing. So how do we go about evaluating these types of predictions that have been made? And if in fact we come to some type of conclusion that there is some kind of major event that may be happening, whether it's on December 21st of 2012, or whether it's just sometime between now and the year 2020, or sometime while we're still young enough to walk around and participate in this, what do we think is going to happen in the context of which we can evaluate what kind of grades we might give Barack Obama and his new administration, and how do we actually compare these different proposals and predictions that are being made? How do we evaluate them? And is there some type of radically new paradigm worldview that is actually coming into place? And how do we go about determining that? Is it just that the hippies were all right, everybody was correct, that there's an age of enlightenment coming, or what's happening? How do we exactly go about defining this alleged new paradigm that we think may be occurring? And in light of whatever assumptions we come to with regard to that, then how well is Barack Obama doing? If there's some major event that's going to be coming along, how well is he doing in identifying what that type of event might be, taking steps to keep it from happening, at least minimizing what the potential adverse consequences of it may be, and even if he's not doing as well as we think he might be doing, what are we to do about this? What kind of steps ought we to take? What can we do to help make him have some kind of better response to this? So let's take a look at how a lot of the other people have viewed him in these first 100 days, the big report cards. We have, of course, CNN, the one who basically started all this thing about the great report card. They were all going to show this great report card about Barack Obama, and we were all, everybody was supposed to turn in and vote and send in their emails and vote on this. And we got the if they're not the best damn news team on television, they probably are the most watched. And so we have this group. There's Paul Begala, a Democratic consultant, gave him a straight A+. And Donna Brazil, who's another Democratic Party consultant that was Al Gore's campaign chairman, she gives him a straight A. And then there's David Gorgan. David Gorgan is a Republican advisor to both to Ford and to Reagan, and then later to Clinton. And he gives him an A-. And another A- from Jeffrey Toobin from the New Yorker. And then it goes down to a B+ with Gloria Barger from U.S. News and World Report. And then it goes down to a B from Ed Rollins, another Republican advisor to the Reagan administration. Rollins says a kind of funny thing. He said, as a man, a Republican advisor, as a man who never got more than a C in college, I give him a B, and that's pretty darn good. I think he's starting out good, he said. But then we go down to a C with Roland Martin, a black correspondent who thinks from a kind of a more progressive point of view that Obama's not doing enough, and gives him a C. And then we have the Weekly Standard. Stephen Hayes checks in with a D-, saying that well, he's made lots of decisions without any really serious regard as to what their consequences are going to be, like closing down Guantanamo and stopping all of these interrogation techniques that we need to protect ourselves, right? So what are we supposed to think? We've got an A+, an A, and a couple A-, a B+, a B, a C, and a D- from CNN. So that doesn't really help tell us much. We get an overall evaluation, however, from CNN, people that called in, that 33% of the people in the country who called in gave him an A. A third of the people in the country have given him an A. 20% of the people have given him a B. 11% of the people have given him a C. And then there's 25% of the people who have given him an F. And as it turns out, you might think those were all Republicans. But as it turns out that they're not. There's some of them that are not Republicans. The fact of the matter is that, strangely enough, some of for example, the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a very progressive group in Washington, D.C., has given him a 70 overall on a scale of 100, and they've criticized him for the lack of some of his steps he's taking. They say, for example, that whereas he's given $43 billion for the American recovery for alternative energy, $20 billion for renewable energy, $500 million for green job training, they say, and he has rejected $50 billion for the development of private nuclear energy after Sluggo and a lot of the other people we know in Washington, jumped all over him. But they said at the same time, while he's been doing this, it's important to remember that in these same 100 days, on January 30th, the World Marine Biologists Association reported that an increase in the acidic level of the oceans is proceeding at a much, much higher rate than they had expected before, and that by the year 2040, virtually all of the reefs in the oceans will be dead. And it will result in the collapse of the global fishing industry, in mass starvation for millions. On February 16th, Chris Field, the Nobel Prize leader of the United Nations International Panel on Climate Control, reported that the global warming was much, much worse than it was expected, that the Arctic warming is going faster than they thought. It's releasing vast amounts of CO2, that in fact by 2040, at the present levels, that 1,000 billion tons of carbon and methane gas are going to be released from the areas of the world where the permafrost is melting across the top of the planet. And to give some perspective on that, the total amount of carbon, they're talking about 1,000 billion tons, that in the entire history from the beginning of the industrial age, only 350 billion tons, 1/3 of that has been released so far. And that this could all be released between now and the year 2040. And they say that the implications are potentially staggering, that it could generate a cascading effect that we could not stop. And they point out that the Arctic ice caps are melting, and that they could be entirely gone within 30 years, again by 2040. And they point out that the Obama administration has proposed standards for the reduction of carbon emissions to reduce the carbon emissions by 20% by the year 2020. Now, as you may recall, that's the exact same proposal that John Kerry made back in 2004. That even though the International Panel on Climate Control of the United Nations in 1995 said that we had to reduce the global greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by the year 2012, or else we were going to be irrevocably wedded to a 5.8 degree rise in the mean global temperature of our planet. And that this was going to result in at least a 40-inch rise in the sea levels that would in turn generate the inundation of millions of square miles of shorelines around the world and result in the saltwater contamination of the underground aquifers in those entire regions of the planet that could contaminate with salt water up to 1/3 of the potable drinking water on the planet. And that with the same emission, without stopping those emissions, that it's going to generate the melting of the polar ice caps, which will eliminate a second 1/3 of all of the potable drinking water on the planet. So that unless we reduce the global greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by the year 2012, we're going to be wedded to those consequences. And yet, the Obama administration, as is pointed out by the Institute for Policy Studies, is proposing reducing the global greenhouse gas emissions by only 20% by the year 2020. And that we will not reach the goal of reducing the global greenhouse gas emissions to 70% until the year 2050. They're talking about 40 years before the global greenhouse gas emission levels would be reduced to the level that they need to be reduced to by 2012. So the so that what they're saying at the Institute of Policy Studies in their report card is that we must change the politics of the United States. Because it's under the present conditions, the Obama administration is in fact yielding too much to the major forces that are in Washington, D.C. The major lobbyists, the major political power groups in Washington, D.C., looking for more and more support from the Republicans and some of the moderate blue dog Democrats, et cetera, in that they're accepting policies that are weakening the ability to really address these issues. For example, Ralph Nader says, "Where is the backbone?" Ask Ruth Marcus, the usually restrained lawyer columnist for the Washington Post, on April 15th, just a month ago. She wrote, "When will he begin to fight? In what cases will he fold? The answer to this question is not yet clear, but I'm beginning to worry. He has a little too much inclination to crumble. For all the chest thumping about making hard choices and taking on entrenched interests, there has been disturbingly little evidence of his willingness to do either. This is so even within his own Democratic Party, never mind just with the Republicans." And in the New York Times is quoted by Ralph Nader as saying, Barack Obama, New York Times, 4 days later on April 19th, "Barack Obama is well known for bold proposals that have raised expectations, but his administration has shown a consistent tendency for compromise and caution, even a willingness to capitulate entirely on some very important early initiatives. His willingness to fold has left many loyal Democrats wondering, when is he going to begin to really fight?" Barack Obama's personality and his historical style is not one to challenge concentrated power. And these are observations that are being quoted by Ralph Nader, but from the New York Times. And he says, with regard to the memos, it says, Barack Obama has showed some courage when he ordered the release of 4 of the internal Bush administration Justice Department torture memos, but he has now backed off releasing the photographs of the prisoners that were mistreated in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Obama has come out against the establishment of any kind of a truth commission to investigate the criminal activities of the Bush-Cheney administration, saying that he wants to look forward, not to look backward. And this means that it's an effective immunity for everyone in the Bush administration who clearly violated criminal laws of our land. He says, this is a truly remarkable thing to hear Barack Obama say, a constitutional lawyer. He says, for the enforcement of the law against people who have committed crimes is the very essence of law enforcement. And after all, that is his sworn constitutional duty as the chief law enforcement officer of the land. It was a violation of that oath for which Richard Nixon was removed from office. And then the Green Party goes on to give the Obama administration on the environment a D+, on the economy a D-, on health care a D+, on foreign policy and military affairs a D, and on civil liberties an F. So it's an important question that we have to ask ourselves as to what we think about this in the midst of all of our euphoria about Obama and as happy as we are with him. I mean, I don't think there's a person here that every time he comes on television they sit there and they go, this is fantastic. I mean, this is absolutely fantastic. Not only, I mean, of course, by comparison to Bush, I mean, a sharp stick and only one eye wouldn't be a bad deal. But the fact of the matter is, he seems to be the most remarkable political person that any of us have ever seen. He's articulate, he's intelligent, he's honest, he has integrity, he seems to be interested in doing all the right things, he's realistic with regard to how much he can really get done in light of how the Republicans are, of how the bankers are, of the kind of power that they have and all that. But one of the most telling critiques of him was, and I just want to read a little bit of this, is from Chris Hedges. He says, Barack Obama is actually a brand. And the Obama brand is designed to make us all feel good about our new president. While the corporate overlords continue to loot the treasury, our elected officials continue to have their palms greased by virtual armies of corporate lobbyists. Our corporate media diverts us all with gossip about trivia, and our imperial wars expand in the Middle East. Barack Obama is about being happy consumers. We are being entertained. We now feel hopeful. We like our new president. We believe he likes us. But like all branded products spun out from the manipulative world of corporate advertising, we are all being duped into supporting and actively advocating a lot of things that are really not good for us. He says, and with all of the faith and hope, what has Obama given us? He has spent, lent, or guaranteed $13 trillion of taxpayers' money to Wall Street and the banks in a doomed effort to reinflate the economic bubble, a tactic that at best will forestall catastrophe and leave us all broke in facing a profound crisis. Brand Obama has now allocated over $1 trillion in military spending and the continuation of our doomed projects in Iraq and Afghanistan, promising to leave up to 70,000 United States troops in Iraq for the next 15 years. And he's expanded our war in Afghanistan using drones now to assassinate people, and has doubled the number of civilians killed in just the last 3 months. And he refuses to actually seriously consider a single-payer, not-for-profit health system. The Obama brand offers us images that appear to be radically new, but they are inoculating us from seeing that the old engines of corporate power and the vast military-industrial intelligence complex continues to plunder the country. Corporations continue to control our politics, and they do not produce products that are any different, but just the brand is different. And he goes on to say that Obama is proposing increases in nuclear power, advertising them as green energy resources. He continues to increase the money for Afghanistan. He's refused to support many bills. So that this, we have to ask ourselves, what is going on here? Are these people, such as the Institute for Policy Studies and the Green Party and Ralph Nader and the others, New York Times, are they just kind of whining liberals? Is there something behind what they're saying? So we have to ask ourselves, I think, what is it that we think is getting ready to happen if these kind of policies continue? And so that what I want to do is, having set that stage for us, that context, I want us to begin to look at something here. Now, what I want to do is I want to present a certain kind of dynamic to you. And some of you, my friends, have heard this before, but that William Strauss and Neil Howe, who are sociologists, one from Harvard, one from Yale, they went on to teach at Notre Dame University, and they did a major sociological study, an inductive study of interviewing tens of thousands of people. And they were trying to gather from an inductive point of view the points of views of people. And what they came to the conclusion in studying this, they've determined that there's a simple sociology that functions, that in every 100-year period, there are basically 4 generations that are born of approximately 21 to 25 years each. And therefore, during the course of our lives, we really only get to know, in any significant way, people from 4 different generations. We know our parents and a number of people of their generation. We know members of our generation. We know members of our children's generation. And there's usually a generation in between there, in between our parents' generation and our generation. In our instance, the Korean War generation. There's the World War II generation of many of our parents. There's the Korean War generation. There's us, the baby boom generation. And then there is the millennial generation of our children. Children born in the last 21, 22 years of the 20th century. And what they say is that of these 4 generations, there has been a pattern that has developed down through the years. that they have been able to discern. And that is that out of these 4 generations, one of these generations is an idealist generation. That is the generation that is born, begins to be born, right at the end of the resolution of a major secular crisis. In our particular instance, it was the secular crisis that occurred in 1929 with the worldwide depression and the onset of global war. So we have the Depression of 1929, we have the World War II, massive killing of millions of people, the destruction and disruption of lives throughout the planet. That was the last major secular crisis. That was the secular crisis of the 20th century. And we, in the baby boom generation, began to be born right as that secular crisis was being successfully resolved. And that this is the historical pattern for an idealist generation. And in this case, the births began basically in November of 1942, after the Battle of Stalingrad. You remember the German army was broken in front of the gates of Stalingrad in November of 1942, in the winter of 1942. The United States had already destroyed the Japanese Navy at Midway earlier. So everyone basically knew that the axis had been broken, and it was a question of kind of following up on all of that and getting it finished. But there began to be this kind of rising sense of elan. But we know, of course, that the huge spike in the baby booms started when the men came back from the war in 1945, and this huge surge of babies began, the baby boom, where we sort of get our nickname from. And there were 82 million Americans born between that period, 1942 of November 42, all the way up until the 21-year period of November of 1963. And not surprisingly, the demarcation line for the end of that period was November 22nd of 1963, actually. So that we have that 21-year period. And that the idealist generation was born, 82 million of us during that period of time, from 1942 to 1963. Okay? Largest generation in the entire history of the world. Best educated generation in the entire history of the world. And what they say is that generation, an idealist generation, is followed by a reactionary or reactive generation. In this particular instance, the X generation, that has gotten a lot of ink. People who are very interested in Wall Street and banking and BMWs and new houses and how many pairs of shoes they can have, things of this nature. There's all kinds of unfortunate press that goes down about the X generation people. But this has been an historical pattern, they point out, that, for example, the idealist generation of the previous century were the progressives, the ones that were born after the American Civil War. American Civil War that went on up to 1865. The people that were born between 1868 and 1888, 1890, that whole generation of people are the ones that generated the Chautauqua movement, that generated the movement that initiated the women's suffrage movement, the American labor movement, the public education movement, the anti-child labor movement, that all of those major movements were generated by the idealist generation of the previous century, and that were born in the 19th century, that came of age at the very beginning of the 20th century, and they were the progressive generation, the idealists of that generation. Now, and there's another pattern that they've pointed out here, is that the idealist generation, even though they're followed by a reactive generation, the reason that next generation is usually reactive is because the previous generation to the idealists, in this particular case the World War II generation, the Richard Nixons, the World War II generation, they get so upset about the upsurge of these idealists. These idealists all go through a certain pattern whereby we begin to be born right at the end of this resolution of the secular crisis. We come of age, we are pampered, we're taken care of, we're taught all the mythologies of a can-do society. The society has succeeded in successfully resolving the secular crisis. They feel a rising sense of abilities. They pass this on to their children who are born in this era, in the afterglow of the success of this resolution of the crisis. And for that reason, this generation is extremely confident. They understand all the values and the mores of the society, and they believe them because they've been taught this in an atmosphere of success. And so they get to the age of 18, 20 years old, they get into their young adulthood, and they go out into the world, and lo and behold, they discover that it ain't exactly like that. They discover, for example, the war in Vietnam. They discover, for example, that the United States is in the midst of invading a major foreign power, and that they're in fact attacking people like Ho Chi Minh, who in fact was trying to establish a democracy. They discover that in fact it was in violation of the treaties that were signed by the French in 1954. And they begin to discover that the people who taught them all of these values turn out to not be entirely consistent in enforcing those values. And so there's an era of upheaval that takes place. These idealists, they rise up and they confront the previous generation of their parents as hypocrites, not abandoning their belief in the values that they've been taught by the parents, but attacking the parents as hypocrites, as failing to live up to the standards that you have taught us. And that they rise up and get in their face and challenge them. And this has happened over and over again. The original set of the idealists were the Puritans, the young people who in fact left Europe confronting the royalist class, and challenging them and in challenging the church, the Catholic Church and the Reformation. They rose up and challenged the institutions of royalism and Catholicism in Europe, established these upstart Protestant denominations, in that they left their actual country to come all the way over here to the New World to establish a new England, actually, a New York, a new Amsterdam, a new city on the shining hill. That's what they were doing. And that they were brother this and sister that, and they owned all their property in common, and they all had long hair, and there's a very common theme that's established. You can actually find some of the earlier writings of the previous generation kind of dumping on those people, and it sounds just exactly like Richard Nixon. And the people sounded later on, talking about the baby boom generation. Did everything but call them a bunch of little negative nabobs, you know? And so that this pattern has been demonstrated over and over again. There's an idealist generation that's taught the ideals of the culture, rise up, discover that the parents are not fulfilling those, challenge them. That generation, that previous generation, digs in its heels, locks down, excludes that generation from leadership to the best of their ability, or buys a few of them off and gets them to buy into the kind of conservative mores of those people who are holding on to the woodwork, and get them to come and pretend to be actual members of the ideal generation, but they're not. And what happens is that an entire 10-year period goes by of this upheaval, consistently, over and over and over again, until the previous generation locks down on them and takes the effort to train the new generation that's being born after the birth of the last members of the idealist generation, and telling them, don't listen to those fuzzy-headed hippies. Don't listen to all of those whining baby boomers, those narcissistic baby boomers that all they want to do is smoke dope and party and criticize us hardworking people. So what you want to do is knuckle down and work hard, and you'll get ahead, and we'll hire you. And that happens over and over and over again. But what happens, and this is an important dynamic, is that the children of the idealists, who are the millennialists for the most part now, the millennial generation kids, become a civic generation, a generation that listens to what their parents are teaching them, the idealists, listen to those idealist beliefs and things, learn about them, and what they do, they are challenged by a new secular crisis that occurs in the following century. The reason that that secular crisis occurs is because in the previous century, the secular crisis that was confronting the people of that century has been addressed by the century's previous civic generation, and they compromise on the pure ideals in order to successfully address in some practical, compromised way the crisis that's actually confronting them. The classic example was Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt came on as a classic member of the civic generation of that 20th century and struck a compromise with the capitalist bankers, with the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the J.P. Morgans, and just regulated their economy, put them under some kind of constraints, restricted some of the antitrust activities, restricted some of the kind of stock market activities that they engaged in, etc., imposed a bunch of these restrictions, and in fact, saved the capitalist system, as people say over and over and over again. And so what happened is because of the compromises that were struck, they solved the problem, got the things functioning back again, but the weaknesses that were implicit in those compromises continue to fester all the way down through into the next century. And that what the William Strauss and Neil Howe have discovered in their major work, it's entitled Generations, A History of America's Future. And it talks about the fact that these crises have come on, and the crises that have come on were the first crisis was in fact the Protestant Reformation. The next one that came was in fact the whole Puritan upsurge in the coming to this country. Then in fact came the Revolutionary War in the following century. Then came the American Civil War in the following century. Then came the Great Depression in the World War II. And now it turns out that they've watched the pattern in approximately every 85 to 90 years. A major secular crisis will reoccur again. They'll come back and revisit a lot of those same major fundamental problems. And therefore, if you look to 1929 as the date of the beginning of the last major crisis in Western civilization, you see that we're scheduled to have another major crisis sometime between 2012 and 2020, right in that period. So what we have is a comparatively objective, inductive study that's been done by William Strauss and Neil Howe, trying to determine what the patterns are that function over time within our country, within our Western civilization. And what they're saying is that there is getting ready to take place now a major secular crisis that is caused by the core weaknesses in the structures, the economic and political structures, as they were compromised and put back into operation back during the 1929 to 1945 period by Franklin Roosevelt and the Democrats in the New Deal. And so therefore, what they're suggesting is that what we have seen happen here is, as Obama, now you saw everything was hunky-dory, everything was going along fine, the economy was in great shape, it was fundamentally sound, the market was going really well, everybody was lending money and borrowing money and buying things, people's houses were going up in value, until it was announced that Barack Obama was almost certainly getting the nomination for the Democratic Party, and it began to look like he was actually going to win the presidential election, at which point all the Republicans came rolling in and said, oh, this is horrible, the economy is in absolute terrible shape, that we have got to have given to us $700 billion of the future tax money that is going to be raised through the taxes during the Obama administration so that we can in fact shore up our economic system. And you need to give all that money to us right now. Right now. We'll give you 2 pages. We'll give you 2 pages of explanations of why we need it. And we want this overnight, or else the whole thing is going to collapse. Okay? And they were assuming that if they got the $700 billion of the future projected tax monies during the next 8 years, that in fact that means there wouldn't be enough money left in the kitty for Obama to do any of these major things that he was threatening to do, such as, eliminate the petroleum industry and substitute for it a major alternative energy system. Or substitute for the insurance industry a major, publicly financed health system. To finance education for the vast tens of thousands of people in the country who can't afford to go to college. These types of things, or to close down the vast polluting activities of the corporations to try to protect the environment. Well, that can't happen. So let's take the $700 billion that you might use to do that with and take it all ourselves, and then he's not going to have any if he gets there. What Obama has done, of course, is when he got in, he said, good, there's your $700 billion, I'll take $800 billion of the rest of the tax monies, including the taxes that you're going to have to pay when I'm going to allow to expire the Bush tax credits, tax reductions for you. And so what he's done is he has called their bluff, thrown down on them, that says, you want to increase the national debt by $700 billion, we'll just double it and add another $800 billion on it. And so the question then arises is, well, how effective is that going to be? Because the fundamental critique of what Obama is doing is that he has not, up to this point in time, attempted to alter the fundamental assumptions of that entire economic system. And that is that the banking system is all completely private, the Federal Reserve is all completely private, even though everybody thinks that it's in fact an American government institution. It's an institution that is owned privately by 7 major banks. And they leave it in private hands, and they have the entire wealth of the country predicated upon debt. That the money is money owed. And he is not taking a position where he's going to prohibit the trading in these kind of ridiculous the derivatives. Yeah, I mean these whole derivatives that they have is that, everybody has a pretty good idea what they are. A bank loans 10 people, say $1 million, to buy a house. So they got $10 million of mortgages out, and they expect that the mortgages are guaranteed by the value of the houses, but the house, 2 years ago was only worth $500,000. So now they've loaned out $1 million for someone to buy the house at $1 million. They've got it secured by a house that's worth only $500,000, but they've got the paper that says it's worth $1 million. And so what they do is they bundle those 10 of those things for $10 million, and they sell it to someone else for $9 million. And they say, here, you take it, we'll get our $9 million right off, and you'll buy it for $9 million, you get it discounted, and if you can collect $9 million of that $10 million, you're in like Flynn. Okay? But what those people do is turn around and take the $9 million, they take 10 other ones of those, they put them together and have $90 million worth of these things, they turn around and sell them to somebody else for $80 million. And they just keep passing it on like that. And to the point where they end up with these derivatives, where they have a set of derivatives that are on the face of them worth $5 billion, and they're secured by property that's worth like $20 million. And they think that they can just keep on doing that. And as long as nobody's looking, it's kind of like running really fast on really thin ice. As long as you don't go too slow, you aren't going to fall through. They're thinking, but the problem that the critics are pointing out with Obama is that he's not challenging the fundamental flaws in the thinking. When you have an economic system that is generating hundreds and hundreds of billionaires who are taking money and buying luxury cars and yachts and in diamonds, in all kinds of stuff like this, and you got 10 million people a year starving to death on the planet and dying of diseases for which we've known the cures for 100 years. I mean, either you get it or you don't get it. Something's wrong here. And the problem is that it's not clear whether he gets it. whether he's willing to say, well, look, let's just kind of fix this back up and get it fixed back up so that it's working as well as it was working 5 years ago. I mean, how well was it working 5 years ago? Obviously not very well. And so that's the fundamental problem. Now, so the question is this. Are we being taken for a ride here with Obama? Or is Obama taking them for a ride? Is Obama playing three-dimensional chess against these people in the banking world and in the military-industrial complex world who are playing checkers against him? And he's bringing in people like Tim Geithner. He's bringing in people like General James Jones as national security advisor, who was on the national board of directors of Chevron, and other places. And he's bringing in all these people that are part of the woodwork from Goldman Sachs and everywhere else. He's got them in. They're all very, very loyal to him. And is he giving them enough rope to basically hang themselves? Is he giving them all this money and letting them run out then and squander it on giving money and bonuses to themselves? And having the people be so furious at them that he's then forced to do something more radical? You remember the conversation that we were talking about the other day, is that when Obama met with the bankers, he said to them, look, you got to understand, I'm the only one standing between you and the people out in the streets with the pitchforks and the torches. I'm not sure they caught the Frankenstein image quite exactly, but the bottom line is, so he's telling them that he's basically trying to persuade these people into stopping what they're doing. But he's not recommending any fundamental radical changes in the assumptions of the structures. Same exact problem with Afghanistan. He's now moved to try to get the troops up out of Iraq, but all he's doing is, as you've seen, the studies are showing, he's planning to leave from 50 to 70,000 United States military people in Iraq. And the people that he's taking out of there, he's moving to Afghanistan. And he's beginning to get drawn into that same kind of analysis that, the real problem in the Middle East is a whole bunch of those Middle Easterners. That there is this group that he calls them Al-Qaeda, but the fact is, it's the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood has been in operation ever since they threw the British out of there. And that they were the ones that were behind the Mujahideen when they in fact organized to throw out the Russians. And and somehow he seems to be thinking that somehow we're going to be capable of doing something that they weren't capable of doing. And exactly what is it for? If you stop and think about it, what has he said that the purpose of being really in there is all about? I mean, does anybody really believe that the United States military is in there because these people are bad to women? Because they walk around with sticks and beat up women for wearing lipstick and stuff? Do people really believe that's why the United States is there? Because when you stop to really understand what happened there, which I want to share with you here, not by way of just woodenly criticizing Obama, but it's just to try to get a grip on what's really happening here. What's really happening here, we will recall, is that George Bush Sr., back in 1991, in June of 1991, when he received word from the intelligence community that it looked like the Soviet Union was getting ready to potentially collapse, which they did on December 31st of 1991. So 6 months earlier, in June, he's getting this word, and he said, wait a second, this is a problem now because, little known to virtually everybody, the United States, through Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, back in August of 1972, remember back into yesteryear, back in 1972 when Richard Nixon was still in power, okay, that he in fact in August had gone to China with Henry Kissinger. in the stealth, much to everyone's surprise. They didn't even know that he'd gone there. And he was negotiating with China about trying to open China. But what he did is on the way back, he stopped in the stealth with Henry Kissinger, and he stopped in Saudi Arabia and had a set of meetings for a full day and a half with King Faoud and with Crown Prince Abdullah, and then later went on into Iran and met with Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. And in those negotiations, they negotiated a re-establishment, a renewal of the 60-year contract, the exclusive contract for leasing the oil fields in Saudi Arabia and in Iran for Aramco, which is the Arab American Oil Corporation, which is made up of the 7 major Western oil corporations that was struck with Faisal back at the end of World War I. There was a 60-year exclusive lease agreement that was set. And Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger decided they were going to move in, taking this opportunity to renew that contract, to get a renewed contract for 60 years. And the agreement that they struck with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah in Saudi Arabia was the following. Look, we will agree to allow you to raise the price of your petroleum so that it will generate an increase at the pump of from 34 cents a gallon to $1.34 a gallon. But it's conditioned upon your agreement to use that additional dollar per gallon of profits that you're going to get on this. That you have to use those money first to buy U.S. military equipment, such as the AWACS, the over-the-horizon radar, billions and billions of dollars of military equipment exclusively from the United States military industrial corporations. And secondly, you have to agree to spend additional billions of dollars to dredge out 4 of your major harbors so that they're capable of taking U.S. warships. And you have to build 6 military bases and 4 air bases in Saudi Arabia and in Iran, in these areas here. And thirdly, you have to agree that if in fact either Russia or China makes a feint toward potentially invading the oil fields of the Middle East and interfering with our exclusive contracts for these oils, that you will invite the United States to come in and occupy these bases, air bases and military bases, and bring our ships in to occupy these harbors to keep them out. That's the agreement, 1972, and it was entered into by Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon. What happened is in June of 1991, here's George Bush now getting information from his intelligence community that the Soviet Union is getting ready to collapse, and he's saying, on the one hand, oh boy, one of our major adversaries is leaving the field right now. But the other one, China, with whom Nixon had struck that deal, is now there making a bid to try to get involved in getting access to the oil in the Middle East. And so what he's going to do is he's worried about losing his enemy in losing the excuse that he might have to invoke the treaty from 1972 to get to go in to occupy the oil fields. So what he does is George Bush Sr. writes a personal handwritten memo to Saddam Hussein and gives it to April Gillespie, who is the United States ambassador to Iraq. And she hand delivers it to Saddam Hussein, and it says, "Dear Saddam, I know that you're having this difficulty with Kuwait and you're in a dispute with them about access to the oil fields along the border between your country of Iraq and Kuwait. And I want you to know that if you find it necessary in your judgment to resort to military force to resolve this, it will not be considered to be against the long-term interests of the United States." At which point, not surprisingly, Saddam Hussein, who in fact was supported and put into power by George Bush Sr. when George Bush Sr. was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency back in 1976 under Ford, actually said, oh well, this is the green light, he mobilizes 10,000 troops and sends them down to the border with Kuwait. And the next morning, the Secretary of Defense for George Bush Sr., who is Dick Cheney, gets on the telephone and calls Prince Bandar, who is the ambassador of the United States from Saudi Arabia, and asks him to come to his office. And he comes to his vice presidential office, and he meets with Scooter Libby and Cheney and Douglas Feith. And they sit down and they have a meeting, and Cheney says to him, oh, we've got special intelligence that is telling us that Saddam Hussein is getting set to invade Kuwait. And after he invades Kuwait, he's going to go in and invade Saudi Arabia. And he's going to overthrow the House of Saud. And so we want to have a meeting. I want to have a meeting, Dick Cheney, want to go and have a meeting with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah because we want to invoke the 1972 treaty that Richard Nixon and Kissinger signed, that even though it's not China or the Soviet Union, here it is, it's Saddam Hussein that is threatening these oil fields, and we want to invoke this. I want to have this meeting. So back goes Bandar, and they set up this meeting, and in August of 1991, Dick Cheney flies to Saudi Arabia, has a full day-long meeting with Crown Prince Abdullah and with King Faoud, and asks them to invoke the agreement, right? Well, the following morning, before any decision had been made on that, turns out that Turki bin Faisal, the son of King Faisal, who had signed the original contracts for the exclusive leases on the oil back at the end of World War I, and who would have, in fact, been the king of Saudi Arabia if it hadn't been for the fact that Faisal was assassinated, and that his younger brother then, Faoud, had to take over. Okay, and Faisal, who has now been the national security chief for Saudi Arabia for 26 years, contacts King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah and says, no, I know what you're doing. I know what's happening in these meetings with Dick Cheney. Don't do this. I want to have an emergency meeting with you first thing in the morning before you make any decision the next morning. And he comes to the meeting, Turki bin Faisal, national security chief for the House of Saud. And he says to him, look, I know that Cheney's trying to invoke this treaty to get them for you to invite in the American infidels here. But let me talk with you with a few other people. And he brings in Mahfouz, Khalil Mahfouz, who's the head of the Saudi royal family bank, brings him into the meeting, and Mohammed Baroum, who is the leading guy that owns the steel mills and the cement mills all through Saudi Arabia. And they say, look, we've got another plan. You don't have to invite the United States military to come in and occupy the Holy Lands in order to get rid of their stooge, who was basically they put in power up in Iraq. What we do is have an alternative. And they go and they open up the door, and in walks Osama bin Laden. In comes Osama bin Laden, presented to the king of the Saudis by the national security director of the Saudi Arabian government, and says, here's the solution that Obama has got, or he has got sitting up in the Khyber Pass 10,000 mujahideen who have just gotten through kicking the crap out of the Soviets and driving them out of Afghanistan. And Osama bin Laden will in fact bring them in and drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait and back into Iraq. Okay? And so that's the deal. And they put charts up and show how he's going to do it in the whole 9 yards. And so Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah say, okay, let's think about this. And the next morning, the third day, back in comes Dick Cheney. He says, I know what's going on here. I know that Faisal's trying to get you to do this thing with these other people, but I tell you, I got a better deal, a sweetener. What we'll do is we'll not only drive Saddam Hussein back into Iraq, we will guarantee to protect you, the House of Saud, against your own people. We will keep you in power over and against the fundamentalists, the radical Muslim fundamentalists who hate your guts because of all your princes running around whoring all through Europe and gambling and having Rolls Royces and everything else. Everybody knows that your people are pigs, and they're going to overthrow you. But we who can appreciate your lifestyle, we will support you. We, our United States military forces, if you invite us in, will protect you not only against Saddam Hussein, but against your own people and against the Muslim Brotherhood. King Fahd says, now that's a deal, and makes the deal and invites in Bush Sr., and they come in and occupy the bases. They bring in the warships and put them in the harbors. They bring in the military troops, 125,000 U.S. military personnel, bring them in, push Saddam Hussein back up into Iraq, and walk away and leave him there. And set up a no-fly zone, which they have to man with 125,000 U.S. military personnel, which they leave in place. And so Osama bin Laden comes back raging to Turki bin Faisal, saying, there it is. It's just exactly what I told you was going to happen. They're going to come in and they're going to occupy the Holy Lands. They're not going to leave. And so he begins the jihad against the United States to drive them out, who have come in and occupied their Holy Lands, because they're coming in there to keep the Chinese from getting access to the Middle Eastern oil. Because the confrontation is to be between, now that the Soviet Union is getting ready to collapse, the coming confrontation is going to be between the United States and China. That's the deal. And so they've got to keep China away from the oil. And that's what they went in to occupy the oil fields for. That's why Saddam Hussein, got lured into going in and doing what he did to set them up. And that's what's going on with the occupation of the U.S. military forces in the Middle East right now. And that's the fundamental dynamic that's really going on, that Osama bin Laden is trying to drive them out. And he's got not just the Al-Qaeda and not just the Mujahideen, he's got 2.5 million armed Muslim Brotherhood members that will blow you up and eat your sister, to get you out of there. I mean, these people are not going to stop. If they think they had trouble with the Viet Cong, they've got big trouble with these people, because they're not going to allow them to stay in there. But Barack Obama has gone in and said, well, these are really bad guys, they're we've got to go get them, and I'll go get Osama bin Laden, and I'll get him out of there for you. This is naive, and this cannot be allowed to happen. So the question is whether Barack Obama is aware of what the deep fundamental dynamic is that's going on here, but he can't not know it. I mean, the reality is that when George Bush Jr. got selected to come into the presidency and came in, first thing on his order of business was to invade Afghanistan. He had it all planned to invade Afghanistan. The memos are all there. That we had our American embassies were notified in Pakistan and other places. The ISI, the military intelligence in Pakistan, therefore their ambassador went and told the Taliban that in fact they've been advised that the United States is getting set to invade Afghanistan. George W. Bush was getting set to invade Afghanistan in October of 2001. Because the Taliban would not allow the pipeline to be brought through Afghanistan from the Black Sea, from the Caspian Sea up in Russia, where they could bring the oil from Russia down through Afghanistan to the warm water port. And as soon as that negotiations broke down, George W. Bush gave the order that they were going to send the military troops into Afghanistan. Okay? And that was what they had planned, all that was actively underway when in fact 9/11 occurred. Okay? So what I'm saying is that we need to be clear about what's going on here. That the George Bush Sr. administration has designed a program back in 1991, when right as the Soviet Union was collapsing. Very specific things happened then. That when the Soviet Union collapsed on December 31st of 1991, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, came into the office the following Monday in January of 1992 and drafted up the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document. And in this, he set forth the full blueprint for the project for a new American century. We are the last remaining superpower on the planet. The Soviet Union is now gone. We don't have to listen to anybody. We don't have to allow any military force anywhere on the planet to allow themselves to build up so that they can in fact challenge the supremacy of United States military power even within their own borders. It says. And nor should we tolerate anyone else depriving us of privileged access, continuing privileged access to the raw materials that are needed by the members of the new Northern Industrial Alliance. The hell was that? The new Northern Industrial Alliance. What the hell is that? So this position is being taken in the original draft of the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document. And that is published on February 18th. It's secure. It's a top secret document distributed to the members of people in the Pentagon and in the cabinet. And a big brouhaha breaks out because the New York Times and the Washington Post get copies of this. And they say, wait a second, this is imperialism. This is raw, blatant Caucasian imperialism right out of the 19th century. Now, nobody said it, but they might just well have said it and say, well, what would you expect? You know? The fact is that that was our policy up to 1917. The whole period of time at the end of the 19th century of major imperialism of England into India, the Belgians into the Congo, you know, the Germans into Africa, the United States, you know, this was the whole era of imperialism. And what happened, it was imperialism that was driven by a concept of Caucasian racial superiority. It was the white man's burden. It was, in fact, manifest destiny. It was unbridled Caucasian racism and economic exploitation that was the driving engine. It was indeed the organizing principle of the nation states of Western civilization toward the third world countries at the end of the 19th century. And it was, in fact, the antipode of Caucasian nation state-based capitalism and imperialism that, in fact, generated the antithesis of the Russian communist worldwide communism. That was the antithesis to the thesis of nation-state Caucasian-based capitalist imperialism. And that antithesis and thesis clashed from 1917 all the way up to December 31st of 1991. And as soon as the antithesis fell away, it was completely to be expected that that thesis would rise again. And it would assert itself in raw form, as it did in January of 1992 with Paul Wolfowitz in that original draft of the document. It was just blatant, you know, Caucasian military imperialism. And that's what happened. And the fact is that it got exposed by the Washington Post and got exposed by the New York Times, and they were all embarrassed about it, and so they withdrew it. And in fact, a second draft of the document was written up by George Bush Sr., President of the United States, and Colin Powell, his Chief of Staff for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and by his Director of Covert Operations of the Central Intelligence Agency back in 1976, Theodore G. Shackley. And they put together a new document. It was a second alternative draft to the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, and it was entitled The Projection of U.S. Military Power into the 21st Century and Beyond. And what they did is they said, no, this kind of raw, imperialist, you know, racist kind of adventurism that's been articulated in that initial draft is not acceptable. We think we ought to do this all through alliances. We think we ought to have an alliance between the United States and Canada and Mexico, an economic alliance, a new NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. We want to have an agreement, an economic agreement among our three countries, and we will join into an economic agreement with the members of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades from the new upcoming European Union, with a new, getting ready to be reunified Germany now. And that the members of this alliance, take a look at this now, is the United States, Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, the new reunified Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. And also, it says, Russia. Now that Russia has spun off its ethnic provinces. The ethnic provinces being Islamic and Asian. And now that Russia is back to the good old Caucasian white Mother Russia, she's in on the agreement. And that therefore this is the new alliance, the new Northern Industrial Alliance that is going to rise up and challenge the new Asian empire under China. And that's the policy that was articulated by George H.W. Bush in the final draft of the 1992 U.S. Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document. That is the thesis of the conservative Republican Party. And that is the foreign policy that is being adopted by Barack Obama as the alternative to the resuscitated Project for a New American Century. That as soon as George Bush Jr. got designated as the president and brought in as his vice president Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney brought in Scooter Libby, and they brought in Doug Fife, and they brought in all those same people that were the authors of the first draft of the document in 1992. They just brought that in, and they went right straight to doing that for 8 straight years. And so while that was a colossal failure and generated all of the kind of consequences that we've seen, the fact of the matter is to make a tactical decision to return from a reactionary foreign and military policy to a conservative foreign and military policy that is rooted in the basic assumptions of George Bush Sr. and the conservatives in the Republican Party, the normal Republicans. Not these kind of weirdo reactionaries who tried to hijack the Republican Party. But so what we're looking at is basically Barack Obama being persuaded to have a basic conservative foreign and military policy, which is just the same one that we would have gotten if we'd elected George Bush Sr. again. So we see his economic policies, we see his foreign and military policies, we see his position with regard to Afghanistan, we see him maintaining the military tribunals, we see him maintaining the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, we see him refusing to allow to be prosecuted the major telecommunications companies that in fact criminally wiretapped the telephones of millions of Americans. We see all of this happening. Now, question, is he doing this because he's just trying to give them enough rope to hang themselves? Because if he is, then he's got the exact right people inside his cabinet and inside his military advisors and everyone else, because if in fact these policies fail, then he's going to have the most effective possible team of people around him to say, okay, that failed, now you've got to accept this other set of policies. And you've got to do the hard work of the lifting of all the people in those communities with whom you are close associates. As the former president of Goldman Sachs, Geithner, and you, Jim Jones, my national security advisor, as the former member of the board of directors of Chevron, you've got to go and sell it to your people, okay? And so this is, and who would you rather have as one of your key policy people, other than Rahm Emanuel, your chief of staff, to try to sell something to the Israelis if the policies fail there? Rahm Emanuel, whose father was a political assassin for the predecessors to Mossad. So that there's a very, very interesting thing going on here. And that it is crucial for us in the midst of our euphoria of having gotten rid of Bush Jr. and Cheney and these people to really understand what it is that may be going on here. That there are several alternative scenarios that could be going on with Obama right now. And the best of them is this potential 3D chess scenario, that he really has a much more progressive agenda. He's going to give them enough rope. He's going to bring in the right people so that at the time when these policies fail, that they can move to a more progressive agenda and say that they've exhausted the administrative remedies that might have been available through those more conservative policies. But the difficulty is, it's a very serious difficulty, once you bring in the kind of people who agree with this more conservative set of policies, and you get them committed to trying to make these things work, and you get laws passed that are set up to make them work, you get regulations set up that are designed to make them work, it's very difficult to disentrench those types of institutional settings. And that even if, in fact, those policies continue to fail, as they have failed in the past, the momentum continues to carry you on into that deadly realm. And that's the major danger that we have. Because it seems to me that it's perfectly evident that the proposals that are being made by the Obama administration with regard to climate change, reducing the global greenhouse gas emissions by only 20% by the year 2020, and waiting a full 40 years before reaching the standards that have been mandated by the International Panel on Climate Control to be effectuated by the year 2012, or wedding us to these catastrophic consequences. We've got to come to grips with, what are we going to do in the face of these catastrophic consequences? Or are we going to pretend with George Bush W. that it isn't true? Let's pretend it isn't true. Let's pretend, that we're just getting a better suntan than usual. I mean, what we've got to do is we've got to begin to ask questions of ourselves as what it is we need to do. So the answer to it is that people would argue, as the IPS has argued in their Mandate for Change, a major publication they've just released, they're saying that we've got to organize and mobilize. We've got to educate the American people to transcend this kind of euphoric state that we're in of loving to watch Obama come on and do these wonderful speeches, which is absolutely joyful to watch and to listen to. We've got to educate our people to understand what the limitations are of the actual policies that he's implementing, and do him the favor of mobilizing to compel him to do something more progressive so that he can turn to them and say, look, what can I do here? It turns out that the people with the pitchforks and the torches are inside the castle here. I've been trying to protect you, but I'm sorry, but you've got to go. That's the story. 20 years we've spent in Washington, D.C., that Sarah and I, at the Christic Institute, and we know that if you put the screws down on them, they'll yield. And just like he's yielding to those pressures from the right, he's yielding to them now. And if he'll do it for them, he'll do it to them if we mobilize. Now, the question, however, is given the state of consciousness of our people, given the kind of deeply invested interest on the part of the capitalists and the bankers and the military-industrial complex and the intelligence community, and given the deep vested interest of the lobbies on behalf of Israel, for example, with the Middle Eastern issues. Given all of those realities, given the vice hold that the corporations still have on the political system in the country, can we realistically expect to be able to just reach out and organize and mobilize our people in the present state of consciousness that they're in? And that's the challenge, I would suggest. Because I've come tonight to tell you that I think that is not going to be adequate. I believe that if we mobilized everybody in the country that in fact, on behalf of their own interests, ought to follow some of these policies, that the people have been so poorly educated on the part of the American school systems. They have been so beaten down with regard to their spiritual values. They've allowed to be substituted for any kind of basic values, a kind of a materialist sense of their own self-value. and that they've been stripped of their labor unions. The problem is that I believe that we need to bring about a major alteration in the consciousness of a critical mass of people in the United States, and to have the people organize and mobilize from this new state of consciousness. Okay, so what is this new state of consciousness? So let me try to do something that's a little bit more complicated than the fact that there's only 4 groups of people in the United States, or only 2 that are really relevant: the boomers and the millennialists. You know, that's the analysis of William Strauss and Neil Howe. That there's these 4 groups, and that it's the civics of the millennial generation, the 75 million of the kids, and the 82 million boomers that are the really key people to organize here, the idealists and the civic generation, to get ready to confront the new secular crisis and do it in a completely secular way. I would suggest that we pay attention to a more subtle analysis that's been done by Talcott Parsons. Talcott Parsons was the chairman of the Department of Sociology at Harvard University for about 35 years. And he also undertook a major inductive study over the course of many, many years. He came to the conclusion, slightly modified by Ralph Potter, one of his proteges, that in fact, the people in the United States and in Western civilization really are made up of people who are what they call right systematists. This is just the terms they use. Right-wingers, basically. Left systematists. Left marginalists. Right marginalists. What he called middle marginalists. And Ralph Potter came on and talked about it in great length, and he said, look, there's really an additional 2 groups, which are basically your normal conservatives and your liberals who are here. And what you really see is that if you stop to think about this, what you're dealing with in the simplest terms is people who are the right-wingers are in fact at base authoritarians. They're authoritarians. People who are the right marginalists are what they call reactionaries. Here you have your conservatives. Here you have your moderates in the middle. Dick Gebhardt, the Democratic Caucus, New Democratic Caucus. You have your liberals that are here, Russ Feingold, and the rest of the people. You have your progressives here, which is, of course, Dennis Kucinich in the now 80 members of the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives, and Bernie Sanders over in the Senate. And then you have over here your utopians, or utopianists. Okay? So what they're really saying is that there are basically 7 different subgroups sociologically among the community that we have to really look to organize and mobilize. And what I want to point out is that the argument that we can just take people as they lie here is that there are really about 20% of the people are reactionaries, the people that we've been dealing with basically over the last 8 years, the Christian fundamentalists, all those people that are the people that support the Project for a New American Century. There's about 3% of the people or so that are really authoritarians. That's pretty well outmoded, but you do have guys in here like Cheney. You know, Cheney is not even a neocon. Cheney is an authoritarian. You know, Dick Cheney, I should tell you a little bit of a story here. This is one you'll like. That the Dick Cheney, in the last year and a half of the administration, as you know, he played this special role among all different vice presidents. He had the power, and he was in charge of the war on terrorism. He was always in an undisclosed location, and he had all these things. Dick Cheney was actually running a major political assassination operation. He took it over from Theodore Shackley, who I mentioned earlier was the director of covert operations for George Bush Sr. And he took it on in earnest. And he was running a special unit out of the Joint Special Operations Command of the United States Pentagon, Special Forces people, that he was actually personally tasking to go and commit political assassinations. He was actually in charge of the people running the renditions, of actually flying in and kidnapping people and taking them and sticking them in the neck with drugs and then shaving all their hair off and giving them an enema and tearing their clothes off and putting them in a burlap bag and flying them off to Egypt and other places where they'd be tortured, etc. And the fact is that he set up a facility down in Texas at the old decommissioned U.S. Naval Air Station in Dallas, Texas, where he had the whole thing revised. He didn't recommission it. He just opened the whole thing up privately and had millions of dollars put in to kind of refurbish this place. He actually dismissed his Secret Service detail and got permission to hire Blackwater people for his personal security. And they were in charge of the security there at the Dallas U.S. Naval Station, Air Station. And he was running a major operation. He brought in Israeli pilots and was training them down at the air station, 22 of them, to fly the F-22, the highest level United States military air fighter that is able to get real-time intelligence data from U.S. satellites, NSA satellites, etc. And he was in the process of attempting to, in the last year of the administration, to instigate a major military attack on the part of Israel against Iran. That he was dedicated to trying to knock out the nuclear facilities of Iran. And he knew that they couldn't get the United States to do it politically, so he was attempting to use the proxy of the Israelis. And so what he was getting ready to do, he was expecting to have as McCain's vice president, you know who, don't you? Joe Lieberman. Okay? That Joe Lieberman was to be the vice president under McCain, and that as soon as McCain named Joe Lieberman to be his VP, that was going to be the sign that Cheney had set up so that Netanyahu, the head of the Likud in the coalition, the political coalition in Israel, would withdraw from the coalition, causing that coalition to collapse, and then call for a special October surprise election in Israel so that the Likud would win the election, and Netanyahu would order a strike on the military, the nuclear bases inside Iran, and the flights would be flown by the 22 Israelis flying U.S. F-22s that would have direct access to the real-time satellite intelligence targeting data. And in fact, Cheney sent in his people from JSOA, the Joint Special Operations Agency, into Iran on the ground to place near those nuclear facilities these special beacons that they could use to satellite locate these people to draw them in. And so if in fact that all came down, the minute that Joe Lieberman was to be named as the VP, the signal went to Netanyahu. He withdraws from the Likud from the alliance, has the special October election, launches the attack using the F-22s supplied from the administration, and it wouldn't take 24 hours before the Iranians would be screaming bloody murder that this was the United States that did this thing. These are F-22s. They gave them targeting acquisition information and all that. And in the midst of all the screaming and hollering that was going to be going on, there was going to be a nuclear backpack attack against the Galveston Harbor in Texas that had been brought in by 3 Mossad agents that brought in the backpacks and got caught bringing the backpacks in. Okay? And that Cheney was going to set himself up in the bunker in Texas asserting the continuity of government authority to take over, to run the operation, and to order the retaliation against the Iraqis, or the Iranians blaming them for the nuclear attack on the United States, and corner Obama so that if he did win the election, he would have to then take on the same kind of military responsibility he's taken on over Afghanistan, but dealing with Iran. Okay? The problem that arose with that particular scenario was that when McCain was getting set to be chosen or McCain was getting set to choose Lieberman for his vice president, what happened is a man by the name of Michael Connell, who happens to be the guy that rigged the political voting machines in Ohio in 2004 for the Republican Party, in fact, confronted Karl Rove and said, look, the reason that I agreed as the director of the security system for putting in the computers, the voting computers, into Ohio in 2004, the reason that I agreed to set up an algorithm inside, not the voting machines, but inside the tabulator in Ohio that would be hooked up to a computer down in Memphis, Tennessee, that had the algorithm in it to shift up to 4% of the votes in Ohio from Kerry over to Bush in 2004, was because I am adamantly, as a radical right-wing Catholic, I am opposed to abortion, and you have promised me that you will get Roe versus Wade overturned. And if you allow McCain to pick Lieberman after all that I've done for you, and Lieberman is pro-abortion, and if you allow him to be chosen as the vice president, I am going to blow the whistle on you, Karl Rove, and on the Republican Party, and I'm going to do it as soon as Lieberman is named vice president. At which point, Michael Connell reached out to talk to a guy by the name of William Spoonerman. William Spoonerman is the guy that actually got him the job in charge of putting in the security for all of the computers in Ohio. And Spoonerman ends up calling a Harvard Law School classmate of mine, Cliff Arnebeck, and says, look, can you get me immunity? If I come forward and blow the whistle on these people, can you get me prosecutorial immunity? And I said, and he called me. And so he said, you must know how to do this kind of stuff. You've done the Iran-Contra thing. You had to have all kinds of witnesses and you did all that. So we were in the process of setting this thing up. We got subpoenas issued for Michael Connell. And so Michael Connell had the deposition subpoena served on him. He was ordered to come to the deposition, at which point Karl Rove went back to Connell and said, you can't do this. You've got to stop from doing this. What is it you want? And he said, I don't want Lieberman to be named as the vice president by McCain. And he said, who would you want? And he said, do you believe Sarah Palin, the governor of Alaska, who is a devoted fundamentalist, opposed to birth control, or opposed to abortion, and I would accept her. At which point Karl Rove goes back and runs it through his mind and goes, well, maybe this will work, and communicates to Cheney and to the others that they can't allow McCain to do this, to pick Lieberman. The fact of the matter is, on the Tuesday morning, before the famous Saturday event, where McCain was going to reveal out in Michigan or Ohio, wherever it was, he was going to reveal who his candidate was, his nominee for the vice presidential position. Tuesday morning, McCain picked Lieberman and told his top 3 staff people that he was picking Joe Lieberman for his vice president. At which point, Karl Rove came in and said, wait a second, you can't do this. And he started having the conversation with these people. They all sat and had this great big long meeting. And they said, no, we've got to do somebody different. And they ended up Saturday morning revealing Sarah Palin. Okay? And when that happened, Lieberman was out. The signal going over to Israel, to the Likud, was out. They did not withdraw from the coalition. The attack did not take place. And in fact, Michael Connell was killed in a one-person airplane crash after we had given them major instructions: don't go near your private plane, do not fly that private plane, and he was killed. And so what I'm saying, in Cheney now, Cheney is not going to give up. Cheney isn't exactly going to go away. Cheney has been in this position, kind of position of power, since 1974 with Gerald Ford, when he was in there with that administration. So he's been in this extraordinary position. He's surrounded now by Blackwater people. They've taken out of Blackwater this guy Cofer Black. Cofer, Eric Prince is retired now, and Cofer Black is in. Cofer Black was the deputy director of the Anti-Terrorism Division of the Central Intelligence Agency under Theodore Shackley. And Theodore Shackley was the key guy that ran the entire off-the-shelf operation that set up and created, it wasn't Oliver North, they set up the entire off-the-shelf operation that when Jimmy Carter got elected, they said, we're not going to stand for this. They brought up all these people, took them out of the government, set up the private off-the-shelf operation, and that's what Blackwater is. Blackwater is, in fact, at the present time, attempting to recruit to put in the field battalion-sized military operations, complete with jet fighters and tanks, to be hired by corporations and to be hired by foreign countries, simply for money. And that Cheney is going to be working with them in the same way that he worked for Halliburton when he came out of the government, went into Halliburton and got Halliburton all of those contracts over in Iraq for rebuilding the entire operation over there. And he now is working very closely with Cofer Black, who runs a thing called Intelligence Solutions, Total Intelligence Solutions. The old total solution. And so Cheney isn't going to go away either. So that this refusal on the part of Obama to agree to allow Cheney to be investigated, to allow a truth commission to dig into what Cheney has been doing and what he's still doing, and to refuse to allow that to be expanded, to look into all of the activities of that administration, and more importantly, to not consider allowing the scope of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission to be expanded to investigate the political assassinations, the kidnapping, the torturing that's been done by the United States Central Intelligence Agency and military officials training people down at the School of the Americas for the last 35 years. If we're going to get ourselves right with the people of the world, we need to do it. And that's why these kind of half measures, these type of baby steps that are being taken by Obama, maybe in just the first 100 days that are here, may be positioning himself for more fundamental action later. But as I said before, this is a very, very risky game to bring in people who are supportive of conservative positions, allow conservative rules and regulations to be established, conservative laws to be established, to make decisions that you're not going to prosecute these people, you're not going to investigate these people. This begins to take on a type of momentum that can get yourself trapped here. And in the same way that John Kennedy got trapped in the Bay of Pigs stuff and got caught up in that thing with Castro, which had all been started by Richard Nixon, back out of the 54-12 Committee of the National Security Council when he was vice president under Eisenhower. So Obama has to be extraordinarily careful about doing the kind of things that he has been doing here in this first 100 days. And what I'm saying is that I do not believe that even though these people only make up about 25% of the electorate, my opinion is that you've got like 20% of the people here who are conservatives. You got another 20% of the people here who consider themselves moderates. You got 15 to 20% of the people here who believe themselves to be progressives. Very few, like 3% of the people here who view themselves to be utopianists. But here's what I am proposing. What I am saying is this. There is a fundamentally different consciousness from the perspective of which we need to organize and educate people. The reality is that the reason that Obama is attempting to govern from this middle position and leaning toward the conservatives in this thing is because he believes that this fourth paradigm worldview, this scientific, materialist, Newtonian Cartesian worldview, represents reality. And the fact of the matter is that the fundamental assumptions of the fourth paradigm worldview, those assumptions that go into making up a worldview, it's cosmology, it's teleology, it's theory of how the universe is unfolding. The cosmology is its theory of how the cosmos came into being. And the teleology is the theory of how the cosmos is unfolding and pursuant to what type of laws of nature. The third factor is the ontology, the ontological theory, the theory of consciousness. How did consciousness come into being? Is human consciousness and consciousness of sentient life, is it simply an epiphenomenon of the random interplay of mass and energy, and that we just happen to be quite excited by it because we happen to think it's sort of the defining quality of us, distinguishing us from other beings on the planet? And then the fourth factor that goes into making up a worldview is the epistemology, the question as to what means we have at our disposal to possibly gather information together on the basis of which we can make answer to cosmic questions like that. Are we restricted to just our five traditional senses of sight and smell and hearing and touch and taste, etc.? Is that all that we have? So that you take those four questions, the cosmological question, the teleological question of the direction in which history is unfolding, the ontological question of the source of consciousness, the epistemological question of the means that we have at our disposal for gathering data. If you answer those four questions in a way that's internally self-consistent, they will in fact generate a very specific mode of ethical reasoning. And that brings us to the crunch on this thing, because the mode of ethical reasoning pursuant to which an individual or a community or any kind of group that you organize makes decisions as to what type of conduct, either individual or collective, is right or wrong, or good or bad, or better or worse, is what it's all about. This thing as to what distinguishes people in these seven worldviews, one from another, is the way in which they answer those four questions. And resultingly, they all come up with a different mode of ethical reasoning. And so that the belief that you can just simply lump them together and get them all to do the same kind of things when they're using completely different modes of ethical reasoning is not rational. It's not going to happen. Now, as long as you have people who aren't clear at all about how they think or what they think, you can appeal to people simply based on emotions and in kind of razzmatazz and great oratory and rhetoric, etc., and say nothing about bread and circuses. There are things that you can do, but you're at great risk if we continue to rely simply upon a person who is a great performer, who can in fact make all kinds of nice sounding speeches and give all kinds of good furry feelings and fuzzy feelings to you, but in fact is continuing to maintain the same kind of fundamental policies that are allowing the flaw that is at the center of our economic system and the fundamental assumptions of Caucasian racist imperialism at the base of our military and foreign policy. If that is going to be allowed to continue, and to allow the major industries to stay in positions of power, for example, with the economic thing of in fact, giving away the credits for pollution. There was a whole proposal, okay, you're going to allow the big companies to pollute a little bit more, but they're going to have to pay a big tax on it. They're going to take the tax and they're going to use that for building alternative energy. They're talking now about just giving them these credits and just basically giving them a free rein to continue doing this. Why? Well, because it's hard. Because the Republicans will all vote against us if we don't do that. and some of our Democrats will too. And so that you can't allow those standards to govern the decisions that are being made on these policies. And so the question is what can we do about this? And here, what I'm saying is that it's important to understand that there is a fundamental, important secret that is unknown. Not that some of the things I've told you already weren't pretty secret, because a lot of people don't know about them. But the fact of the matter is that there's a huge thing of importance here. You remember now, I mentioned that from 1917, from October of 1917, when the Soviet revolution took place, the Russian Revolution took place, and the antipode, the antithesis of international world communism, theoretically non-Caucasian communism, organizing the people in Africa, in South America, in Asia, the other places that are the non-Caucasian people, into a communistic, communitarian worldview, as distinct from the nation-state-based capitalist Caucasian imperialist worldview. That from the time that antithesis arose in October of 1917, the United States and the Western powers were locked into this dialectical confrontation with the Soviet Union, as we all grew up to know about. Every single incident that took place in the world, from outer Pudamia somewhere, if two groups were arguing each other, one would end up being infiltrated by the communists and take over, and the other ones would be the CIA, and they would kind of make it into this great big world stage fight. And because of that, there's an important event that took place in 1923 to 1926. Okay? And you remember now, 1917 is when this big conflict started. The United States, as you may well know, sent in a huge brigade of people, of military, in to try to overthrow the Bolshevik government right after the thing. I mean, the United States started it, going in to try to overthrow them. But because of the big confrontation that went on throughout this entire period, all the way from 1917 all the way to 1991, okay, that the discoveries that were made in 1923 to 1926 by Max Planck and a number of others, what they discovered that if in fact you took a piece of matter and you began to subdivide it, and you subdivided it all the way down to an atom, that you could break the atom, and the atom would be broken into protons and neutrons and electrons, and that you could take one of these protons and you could collide it with another and break it up, and that the proton would break up into subparticles of quarks, and that you could take the quarks and collide them, and they would break into neutrinos. And you could collide the neutrinos together, and they'd break up into muons. And you would continue to break these things up, and they discovered that you would ultimately reach a point where the mass entirely appeared to disappear, and that you would have what they call an inchoate quantum field. And the inchoate quantum field would not be at all manifest in the material realm, but that it would in fact flash into material existence as a wave of energy, and then it would drop back out of material manifestation. And then it would pop up into material manifestation again at random events as a particle of mass. And then drop back out of material manifestation, and then drop into it. But the fact is that it wasn't at any predictable rate. That sometimes it would do a couple things in a row of a wave of energy or a particle of mass. And so that what they discovered is, however, that if in fact you directed human intention to an inchoate, non-materially manifest quantum field, intending for it to manifest itself in the form of a particle of mass or as a wave of energy, it would do it to a statistically significant degree of probability. This was absolutely and totally paradigm altering. This, in fact, set aside the entire fundamental assumption that underlay the Newtonian Cartesian materialist worldview that postulated the existence of a world out there and a consciousness in here, that we were somehow dropped into a world of physical reality and physical laws that we were completely subject to, and that we just had to accommodate ourselves to those brute forces in the world. And a second thing that was discovered is that if you took one of these subparticles, say a muon or a quark, and you took it and you put it inside a vacuum tube and you accelerated those particles, if you split a quark and you split it into two muons, and you accelerated them away from each other at the speed of light, and you applied a force to one of them, moving away from the other one at the speed of light, and moved it out of its straight line trajectory, the other one would move as well in the exact same degree, in the exact same instantaneous moment. And so that it became perfectly clear, two things. There was some kind of a force that functioned faster than the speed of light, because they're moving away from each other at the speed of light. And they could be moving away from each other for 2 full seconds, and you could push one of them and the other one would go at the same time. So that what they discovered is that there is a field, a plenum, a quantum plenum, in which all of these material manifestations from the smallest inchoate quantum field all the way up to atoms and electrons, etc. All of these things are simply condensed material manifestations of this plenum. And that for some reason, directed human intentionality or consciousness directed to them actually has a direct effect upon bringing them into material manifestation in a way that is coherent with the intention. And so what this means is that in this period from 1923 to 1926, during the time everybody in the other world was all preoccupied with all this getting and spending, laying waste their power, and dialectic confrontation, you're a good guy, you're a bad guy, there was this thing going on. There was this revolution taking place in the world of physics that basically set aside the most fundamental presumptions about the nature of reality and of our relationship to it. And what that means is that they began to understand that there was, in fact, an infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness out of which the material universe manifested. And that there seems to be a capability on the part of certain individual human beings to direct their intention in such an entirely coherent manner that they can affect the actual manifestation of matter. And so, what they began to understand was that reality was completely different than we had thought it was. It was completely different from the ways that all of the people basically on this side of the socio-political spectrum believed that it was. And so you begin to then say, what about the people on this side of the socio-political spectrum? And so the question that we're faced with now, really, is what about this issue? What about this issue of the ability of human beings to get ourselves into a state of consciousness pursuant to which we can direct our human intentionality in a manner that causes material, inchoate material reality to manifest itself in a way that is coherently consistent with our intention. Now, we've known for some time that there are certain kinds of individuals who seem to be capable of doing this. It's usually in their eyes, as they say. And so that the reality of this is we recognize that there have been certain people that seem to be able to do this, that Jesus Christ seemed to be able to do this, the Buddha seemed to be able to do this. There are certain avatars that seem to know how to do this, Sai Baba, Sri Aurobindo. There's a whole bunch of these people that in different cultures and different times have demonstrated this ability to do these rather extraordinary things that they do. And because of that, around them have grown up these big traditions of, there's something going on here that's completely different than what most people think. And what they do is they just end up going to these people and saying, you're really far out, tell us what to do. Tell us how we're supposed to live. Tell us how we're supposed to somehow not be like you, but do what you tell us to do. And institutions are set up around these people, and after they pass over, there are people who take up the responsibility for telling other people how to act, etc. But the thesis is that there is a process going on in the universe pursuant to which our human family is teleologically evolving a faculty by means of which we are capable of discerning directly and experientially in the same way that we over billions of years evolved a faculty of sight by means of which we were able to directly experientially encounter the electromagnetic phenomenon of light in the same way that we teleologically evolved a set of organs for hearing that are directly able to directly access the material phenomenology of sound waves. That there is a bonding phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately non-divisible unit of inchoate quantum fields in the entire universe together into one systematic, whole, harmonic. And that the beings who have evolved this faculty to a point where they can hear the tone, see the light, access the unified field, can discern immediately and experientially what type of conduct is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the entire universe. That is the referent. That is the referent that needs to be used as the source of normative principles, pursuant to which one engages in making choices. And so the question is, what is it, how long do we need to wait? How long do we need to wait before this type of evolving faculty begins to manifest in an adequate number of people in the world to become a critical mass that enable our people to make decisions that are consistent with life, that are consistent with maintenance of the environment, consistent with peace and feeding people and providing solutions to medical problems. The difficulty is that it seems to be that if we just wait this thing out, that the forces of blindness, the forces of ignorance, the forces of being trapped in the lower vibrational frequencies of our own desires and fears and weaknesses will potentially overwhelm us. And so therefore, there has been left down through the ages lessons that have been taught about how one goes about strengthening this particular faculty. Certain means of diet, certain means of meditation, certain types of abstinence from certain types of kind of foods and in activities. And so that what I'm suggesting is that I'm not suggesting that one starts up some kind of brand new religious order based on this. What I'm saying, however, is that I think that we need to understand that the winds of history and reality are behind those who know that this reality is true. And those who tap into the knowledge and begin to attempt to consciously develop the capabilities of honing their ability to tune in to this particular vibrational frequency and to get to a point where one can rise in one's level of consciousness above the type of programming that one has been subjected to by one's own particular upbringing, by one's own particular genetic coding, by one's particular potential astrological predilections, so that you can actually come to a point of exercising an objective observation about reality, unconditioned consciousness. And from that perspective, make choices about what is harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of being. That is the organizing principle that we're talking about. And what I'm saying is that I believe that if we are going to be able to assist in mobilizing this type of a movement of people in our country, that it's essential for we ourselves to take this seriously. And take it as seriously as the flooding of millions of square miles of seacoasts that's going to happen. Take it as seriously as the loss of 2/3 of all of our potable water. Take it as seriously as the mass migration of billions of human beings that are getting ready to start taking place between now and the year 2040 on our planet. Take it as seriously as the cascading events of the melting of our ice caps, of the release of 1,000 billion tons of CO2 in methane gas into our atmosphere. Because if in fact we take the lesser way and simply continue to watch Obama and take great pleasure in Obama and how much better he is than George W. Bush and how wonderful he makes us feel. And even if we do nothing more than try to organize the liberals or even the secular progressives, many of whom who consider this entire discussion to be a complete delusion, who believe it in fact to be the opiate of the masses, then I do not believe that we're going to succeed. And I think that we would have to then start preparing ourselves for the consequences that are going to follow, and going to follow fairly rapidly. And I believe that the efforts that are being made at the present time by Obama, unless they are changed in a major way with regard to the economy, are going to result in merely worse collapse of the economy. I believe that the global warming, the climate change is going to become radically worse very, very quickly. And I believe that they're not going to succeed in any way in the Middle East in vanquishing the Muslim Brotherhood by simply applying more military power to the solution over there, or somehow demonizing the Islamic jihadists and suggesting that somehow they're just a bunch of ragheads who are, wanting to beat up on women and cut off their lips because they got lipstick on. I mean, this type of kind of venal propagandizing that is going on of declaring these people in their own homeland to be the ultimate other is stuff that we've seen before. And the problem is that if a person with the skills of Barack Obama starts soliciting this type of response on our part toward the people there who we have invaded, and we've destroyed their country and their water systems and are bombing their hospitals and their children. I mean, if he attempts to solicit our support for that type of conduct, we need to be able to rise above that type of influence. We need to be able to rise above it. We cannot just simply engage in antagonistic, dialectical, confrontational, or demeaning activity. We need to rise above it by strengthening our own spirits. And I believe, therefore, that there are a series of steps that we need to take ourselves. Anybody who wants to participate in this type of an organizing, a different type of organizing activity, has got to engage in a major 12-step program to break our addiction to the fourth paradigm, scientific, logical, positivist, materialist paradigm, and have got to be serious about giving ourselves over to the fundamental assumptions of the new paradigm worldview. Doesn't mean that we have to become doctrinaire Catholics or Baptists or Muslims or Jews or anything else. It means that we have got to, first of all, we've got to come to very, very serious grips with the factual realities that we're talking about here. That's number one. We've got to not keep getting caught up in this kind of fuzzy feeling. We've got to really look at what the crisis is that's coming here. And secondly, we've got to understand that we've got to get ourselves into a state of consciousness that is able to work together to cohere a vision of what it is that we want to really happen here. Because one of the things that's true of this new worldview is that every single second of every single day, the material manifest universe is appearing and disappearing into inchoate quantum fields and is remanifesting in the next microsecond in its new alternative. And it is at the nexus of those moments where we insert our intentionality and we make real one of the other alternative realities that is available to that next second of manifestation. And so we need to manifest that objective. So we need to think very clearly about what it is that we're doing and what we want to see happen here, and not allow ourselves to get into getting swayed into, yeah, let's bomb the shit out of those people because, they did this horrible thing or that horrible thing. We cannot allow ourselves to give over our energy to that type of thing. We've got to move over and to have an alternative, positive view of what we need to get done. So another thing that you need to do is I would strongly recommend that you try to find out everything that you can about this alternative worldview, this new paradigm worldview. And there's some very simple places. For example, there's a, maybe I didn't bring it here. Yeah, they did right here. There's a very, very simple book right here. It's called The Quantum Shift in the Global Brain. It's how the new scientific reality can change us and our world. Now, this is strictly scientific. This is not mystical or metaphysical. This is a straight scientific wrap on what the basic information is that's understood. But it does so in the context of the kind of world problems that we're facing. And so this is by Ervin Laszlo. Ervin Laszlo has got this simple book. I would recommend you just get on Amazon and get a copy of it. And I don't want to sound harsh, but the simple fact is, if there's 100 of us here, and 95 of us go back home and don't so much as even bother to go on Amazon and get a copy of something like this to find out what we're talking about here, then I would suggest that we're in serious trouble. I would suggest that while you're sitting here like the two women at the end and turning to your friend and putting your hand on their arm and saying, was there ever a moment? Was there ever a moment when we could have done something to stop this from happening? So it's not asking a lot of you to do that, to find out about this. And I would say secondly, or thirdly in this case, I would say that you should in fact take a look at the different modes of spiritual expression that have historically been made available to us down through the years as a human family. Find one of the avatars who displayed this type of consciousness and find out what she or he has said. And try to understand whether there's anything salvageable inside that tradition that can cause you to associate with that community of people, to try to bond with them and move with them as a potential community, to lift up their consciousness together, to try to direct their human intentionality toward this new world that we're talking about. Okay? So that's the number 3 thing. It's not suggesting any particular one for you. Pick one. And you've got yogas, you've got Buddhas, you've got Christians, you've got Jewish people, you've got Muslims, you've got Sufis, you've got all kinds of options. I mean, it's one of the great things about our time and age. You know, I mean, you could go down to the bookstore and pull off 3 books off the shelf on those things at any one of you. And I would personally, I would strongly recommend that you get a hold of Sri Aurobindo's book. He's got a book called The Life Divine. And he's a perfectly logical, perfectly straightforward, intelligent person that was very, very active in India to try to get England to leave India and allow them to establish their own homeland, etc. Got thrown in jail a bunch of times, etc. But and he's got the community over in India now, the Auroville. You know, there's a bunch of people around. And then now, if you want to look at some books that are a little more intricate about this scientific thing. This is a very simple, straightforward thing, and it's in the context of kind of social problems. You can find books, for example, there's a book here by a fellow named Stephen Rosen, Dr. Stephen Rosen, and it's called Dimensions of Empyrean. Now that's a little esoteric, but it's a topological phenomenology of space-time and individuation. That's the simple title. That what this really is, however, is, and it's Dr. Stephen Rosen. It's called Dimensions of Empyrean, and it's a deep discussion of the new physics and the mathematical, physical rules and laws that obviously are true, and it talks all about them. And when we're talking about individuation, we're talking about attempting to individuate one of the alternative realities that abides in the plenum, that is potentiated at any given moment. And that what we want to be able to do is to render specific that individual reality that is the option for the next moment. And that's what this is talking about. Okay? Now, and I would also suggest, fourthly, just generically, that everybody do this thing that's really hard for all of us, is to sit down for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night and meditate. I'm not telling you one particular way to meditate. You don't have to be a yogi. You don't have to, but like the classic, and I'm not part of their community, but the classic transcendental meditation is about one of the straightest forward things I've ever seen. You just sit down and meditate and chant. There's little ways of doing it. But go get a book on meditation. And just say to yourself, Again, I'm not being harsh, but when you get up in the morning and you say, oh, I got to go to the store, I got to go to the post office, I got to go do this or that, you say, I'm too busy to take the 20 minutes here this morning. Or, oh, I'm too tired tonight, I've been to the movies and I'm too tired, I don't want to do this for you. Just think of the time when you're saying that to yourself about the old ladies sitting there in the street at the end. And when you see it coming down, when you see the inundation of the lands, and you see the millions of people fleeing, and the wars being fought over the land and the water, and the pestilence in the world, try to remember the morning that you were too busy. Didn't want to take the time to spend the 20 minutes. It's too painful for me, too tough for me. And understand that that was the time when, if you'd made the choice in the right direction, that you would have begun to gain the power. You would have begun to gain the insight. You would have been able to gain the kind of perspective that would have enabled you to effectively organize people and to appeal to people, to help on this new vision. Okay? And I would also ask you, fifthly, I would ask you to, if you would, choose one of the major issues. Whether it's global warming, whether it's nuclear disarmament, whether it's economic collapse, any of the major crises, Afghanistan, pick one of the major issues and become knowledgeable about it. As Sergio was saying, Danny seems to know a lot about a lot of things. The only reason I know about them is because I pay attention to them. You read the stuff, you follow you find out about this stuff. So all I'm saying is pick one of these issues so that you can, in fact, become knowledgeable about it. And from the perspective of that particular issue, number 6, reach out to some friends. Reach out to some friends and establish a little circle, a discussion. Just all you have to do is meet, once every 2 weeks. Like a Friday night or Saturday night, like tonight. Gather together 6 or 8 friends and have some readings that you do during the week or 2 weeks and talk about these things. Because that's, in fact, how it starts. That's how you actually become more active. And instead of being just kind of in the ambience, of Ashland, where everybody's above average, and intelligent and comparatively sophisticated, comparatively sophisticated compared to what? Compared to the average person in Kansas, who couldn't tell you who the Secretary of State is? No, that isn't good. I mean, the fact is that we're a substantial cut above a lot of other people, but not good enough yet to know the details to really be able to influence other people. So these are some kind of steps, concrete steps that I'm talking about us doing. And what we're going to be doing tomorrow is we're going to be gathering at 4 o'clock at the library, the Metaphysical Library, and we're going to be having a workshop where we're actually going to kind of get down to some of the nit and grit, taking a look at some of these different issues, what some of the initial information is, what some of the readings are that you can go to find out about some of this stuff, and get into more detail about this, and can answer lots of questions that are available. And we will also, Sarah and I will be there, we can tell you what the kind of things we're doing about this, and that just in brief, we've got the major operation we spend, as Sergio was saying, we spend 10 days every month out in South Dakota because, as it turns out, during the W. Bush administration, for the 8 years of the administration, the South Dakota Department of Social Services took over 3,000 Lakota children away from their parents. and ended up putting them in the state foster care system, many of which are in these group homes, where they in fact are dosing them with pharmaceuticals. They've been declared to be attention deficit disorder or one of these other things, and that they give them Zoloft and Zyprexa, and I mean massive doses of these things. We've got kids there that have been having massive migraine headaches and bloody noses, and they've had their noses stitched closed by the doctors in the group homes to keep them from having these massive nosebleeds. And it's a paradigmatic symptom of overdosing of Zoloft that they've been getting. And the fact is that their parents' rights have been terminated by the Department of Social Services, and they've then taken over custody of the children and have given permission to the pharmaceutical corporations to give them these massive pharmaceutical doses, which are not allowed under the protocols for those drugs, because the pharmaceutical corporations are trying to determine how much drugs they can give kids, because they want to be able to develop the market of marketing their stuff to children in the United States. You know, and it turns out that George W. Bush, when he was the governor of Texas, initiated this program. It's called the Texas Mental Health Algorithm Program. He mandated that every single child that is going to come into the Texas Department of Social Services, either into the foster care system or the juvenile system, had to be administered a mental health test. And the mental health test was drafted up by the Eli Lilly Corporation. I swear to God, literally, by the Eli Lilly Corporation. And it turns out that 65% of all the minority kids that were given the test flunked it and had to have one or more of the pharmaceuticals that was produced by Eli Lilly. And when he came to the presidency, he brought that program with him. And it turns out that of the 12 people that are on his Pioneer Club, those who bundled the largest amounts of money for George W. Bush, 4 of them are the top CEOs for the pharmaceutical corporations in the country. And he instigated the mandate that anybody to get federal funds under the Federal Adoption and Safe Families Act to be able to assist children with special needs to be prepared for being adopted out of the foster care system has to take the Texas Mental Health Algorithm test. And if they flunk it, they get designated as a special needs child, and the administration will give the state up to $79,000 per year per child for such a kid, which they've used to build 32 new group homes and evaluation centers and hire more white people in the depressed area of South Dakota to staff those operations. And it turns out, with the Lakota people being only 13% of the population in the state of South Dakota, 65% of all of the kids taken into foster care are Lakota children. Okay? So that's why Sarah and I are out there. You know, what we're going to be doing is filing a major federal lawsuit against the Department of Social Services to mandate that Lakota children be brought into foster care programs with Lakota families of their own family, and that those families be retrained and restructured so that they can in fact be the old traditional families that in fact were originally the people who took care of their children. Okay? And we want to bring in healthy foods and supplement programs, but we've got an 85% level of unemployment on the 8 reservations in the state of South Dakota. In the United States, the 4 poorest counties in the entire United States are on the reservations in the state of South Dakota. And nobody even pretends that it wasn't just raw criminal activity taking their land away. Raw criminal activity in absolute, open, blatant violation of the treaties signed with them to come in and just take their land away and force them into living on Bantustans in the same way that the South Africans did it to the indigenous people in South Africa. Identical program. And yet we all wake up every morning and say, wasn't it awful what they did to the Indians back 150 years ago? And they're doing it to them every single morning when they wake up. And so those are just the kind of programs that one can be involved in. We're also involved in working to establish a new paradigm academy that will teach young kids when they graduate from high school before they go off to college, a one-year school for training them on what the alternative worldviews are and training them about this new alternative worldview. Also familiarizing them with the social policy problems in the country and in the world, et cetera. It's a one-year academy that we're working. We've struck a deal with a university that's got a major sustainable living program, and they're offering to have their PhD students, who are joint students with their business school, who have to, for their PhD, raise the money for and build a major sustainable project to have 40 of their students put them all onto one particular property. And that would be the new Paradigm Academy with all of the state-of-the-art sustainable living structures for the dormitories and the academies and for the biodynamic gardens and all of that. And that we've got a particular piece of property. We had a piece of property down in Tennessee, a big 350-acre piece of property down there. But the local people who were worried that we were going to be teaching something other than fundamental Christianity, which was supposed to involve handling snakes and other things, I think, that, they didn't want us there. And so that they burnt down one of the major buildings at the place. And so we resold that place and are looking for another place. But we've got one targeted in central California, a big 400-acre place that we're working on now. And I'm in some conversations with the mayor here, hopefully this weekend, about the potential big 800-acre property that's out here that they want to potentially develop. So we're going to be talking with them about the conceivable chance of actually having the academy here if the other property doesn't work. And so that's something that people could become involved in if that develops. And we're also working on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, trying to get the scope of the investigation opened up. We've got Senator Patrick Leahy, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has agreed that he wants to have a Truth Commission, but we want to get the scope of that opened up so that they investigate the long-term kidnapping and torture and assassination programs of the United States, as well as the criminal drug smuggling operations and stuff that have been sustaining those covert operations. If we're going to clean this up, we want to do it in a serious way. But we'll talk about some of those particular concrete programs in the workshop tomorrow. There's no big peroration at the end of this. I'm just saying that that these are. There's a really fundamental reality that I believe that things are in such critical condition right now, and that the probabilities are so low that continuing the same course of events, even though they're substantially better than they were under Bush, continuing them in the same type of algorithm that's going on right now is not going to succeed in stopping this major set of catastrophes, even potentially moving on to potential thermonuclear war with China, in the final analysis of this, because that's exactly what the objective is. And if you want to read about it, you can read about it. Samuel P. Huntington, who is the Olin Professor of International Relations at Harvard, is the president of the American Academy of Political Science, and a major spokesperson for the Council on Foreign Relations, wrote a major book that you've probably even heard about out of the corner of your ear. It's called The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order. And it, in fact, postulates this very dynamic of the United States organizing its NATO allies in the Western world into confronting China in its new Asian empire. And he says rather casually, it'll probably result in a thermonuclear confrontation between China and the United States, which is kind of a little throwaway line. But for those of us who plan to live through this period, this becomes a fairly profound observation on his part. And so that I would suggest you take a read of that if you think that I'm somehow misinterpreting what he's saying. So we want to talk about these things tomorrow in the workshop, because I believe that the people of Ashland are serious people who, given an opportunity to actually have a Saturday evening to discuss important matters like this, will take this opportunity rather than some of the other options, and that I'm hoping that it is indicative of the fact that you will take it even more seriously now that we've talked about it, and that you'd be willing to come to the workshop tomorrow. It's going to be from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And you can ask any of the questions that you might have, and we can discuss the projects that we're working on, whatever the possibilities are of a new paradigm academy that might conceivably be here in Ashland. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you got now for the next, I guess, 15, 20 minutes before I wear everybody out. And then we can all, yeah, if you want some cheerful news at the end of all this, I'll have to think about it for a while, because this is not a particularly happy situation, except that there is good news. There is good news. And the fact is, the good news has been being told to us down through the years. You know, that there is good news. And so, but the fact is that we need to move now from the condition where they're saying, look, don't so much listen to what it is I'm saying to you, they say, but just know who I am. Like what Jesus was saying and the Buddha was saying is, look, and behold what is possible for the human family. Because these people were mutations that just came in early and were flashing, as mutations do, of showing what our human family is capable of. But what I want us to do is to join together in a pact where we commit ourselves to trying to accelerate this particular process so that we can get our human family to that point where we establish the critical mass of people who not only know the good news, but are the good news. And that's what I'm inviting you to join us with tomorrow, okay? So thank you. Thank you.